Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be looking at every single UFL team's 2025 coaching staff. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen 6 teams formally announce their coaching staff, and 2 teams not formally announce it, but very credible sources have said who is going to be on the roster. So we're going to be looking at every single one of these coaching staffs, just kind of doing a brief overview, who returned, who's new, what's the big question mark for them, and all that. So without further ado, let's get started with the Arlington Renegades. Now, the Arlington Renegades brought back very much the exact same staff. Mainly the offensive side is identical. The real difference is Spencer Duncan is new. He is now their defensive quality control guy. He is new, as well as Chris Woods returning. He was with him in 2020 as a defensive coordinator, and he is back. Now, as of now, there's no technical defensive coordinator. Some people expect Woods could end up becoming it. Some expect it to not be him. They did bring back their DC, but they didn't actually give him the DC nod, so kind of questionable there, but it does make sense why. Look, the Renegades this past season offensively were a great team, right? They had a very great running game. Devion Smith was incredible. Their passing game with Luis Perez and that insanely good receiving core and tight end group, it was a great unit. The defense is what really held this team back. Now, yes, they had 10 interceptions, which actually was the most in the entire league, but aside from those interceptions, they were pretty much bottom of the barrel in every stat. Their 4 first forced fumbles ended up canceling out their INTs, as that was the single worst amount in the entire league. And they were bottom 4 in really the big 3 stats. Points allowed, yards per game, and passing yards per game allowed. They were bottom of the barrel in those stats. They were in the 4 worst teams for points allowed, as they were one of the only 4 to have 200 plus points allowed. They were one of 3 teams to allow 300 plus yards per game, and one of 2 teams to allow 200 passing yards per game. It was kind of weird, right? Despite having as many interceptions as they did, their overall pass defense was actually worse than their rushing defense. Their rushing defense wasn't good either at 108 yards per game, but that wasn't among the league's worst teams, like their passing yards per game was. Still poor. Again, that's the big issue. This team's defense just wasn't good. Yes, when they brought in Andre St. Amour, it fixed a lot of their issues, but it didn't really, actually solve them. Just kind of was like a quick fix. I mean, it's like you put a single bandage over like a huge cut. Like, it's going to do something, but it ain't going to actually really help it. So it makes sense to bring in 2 new guys for the defensive side of the ball. Bring back a lot of guys and then just have a couple other guys that are new. Just try to get more people to actually fix that unit. It makes a lot of sense. Overall, solid decisions. I don't see any reason why you would have changed the offensive group. I know some would argue the offensive line, but overall, it was a very solid offense, so that's the Renegades. Now, the DC Defenders. This is where we start to see some decent change. They actually brought in 3 new people to their overall unit. Now, their coordinators and head coach obviously remain the same as their general manager, but their offensive line / run game coordinator, Cody Krill, is new, as well as Andre Simmons at wide receiver and Blake Williams at defensive line, which actually all makes sense. The receiving core was pretty disappointing this season. Ty Scott and Kelvin Harmon both had some time where they looked really good, but overall, this was a pretty poor receiving core. So bringing in a new wide receivers coach makes a lot of sense. Same with the defensive line. They are one of 3 teams that have 19 sacks, which were, bottom 4, obviously 5, 6, and 7. And we'll get to it later, but really if you weren't in the top 3, your sack total just took a massive nosedive compared to those big 3 teams. So bringing in a defensive line coach makes complete sense. You want to make that unit better. Made some questionable personnel choices. I know a lot of people are very confused about why Boogie didn't make the roster, and then the unit ended up not being all that great. They had Malik Fisher, who was incredible, but aside from him, their pass rush was left some to be desired. So again, the new coaches they bring back are great. Now, a big question that some people have is the quarterback coach being the same with Shannon Harris. And I get it. Jordan Taylor is a very divisive player in this league. There's a lot of people who pretty much think that he is an elite quarterback who was just kind of held back by a poor team. And a lot of people think he's really a quarterback that has to have elite talent around him to even be decent. The fact is, over the past 3 years of spring football, he's had 1 year he looked really good, and that was the 1 year he had great talent around him. The other 2 years that he had anywhere from mediocre to poor talent, he didn't really look all that good with the Bandits or the Defenders this past season. So a very divisive player. I understand the concerns for that. But overall, I'm not super shocked with how they changed a lot of things. Greg Williams, in terms of the league, is one of those guys that, while I know a lot of Defenders fans hate some of his play calling, he is one of the bigger names in the league, especially in the coaching staff realm. So it makes sense there. And overall, you don't want to change too much with a team that did make a championship game just 2 years ago. Hopefully, Abram Smith being back healthy is a huge help and the receiving core gets better, but we'll see. Now, the St. Louis Battlehawks, this is where I talk about the huge change. Pretty much like basically like the day after the coaching staff. This is the day I'm recording this and the day this gets posted. At 9:52 a.m., Adam Schefter reported that Bruce Gradkowski is going to be an offensive assistant coach for the Detroit Lions. He was just announced as the offensive coordinator for the Battlehawks. Now, the Battlehawks brought back their entire coaching staff with one difference. That was Gino Gradkowski, who is Bruce's brother, not returning. And that now Mark Colombo is going to be replacing him as the offensive line coach. So you basically lost both Gradkowskis, and now they have to find a new offensive coordinator or promote somebody to it or have Beck take over on that. There's a lot of things they could do. Overall, this is actually a blessing in disguise, I think, to many people. This is kind of like failing upwards. It's like Cliff Kingsbury did for a while, where he was kind of failing upward. And now, granted, he had a really good coordinator time with the Commanders this past season, but when he got like that Cardinals job, it was basically from him failing upward. It's kind of what Gradkowski did, right? He took a very talented offense last year, turned him into statistically a very mediocre unit, and now got an NFL job. Now, he got hired by the Lions, so a lot of Lions fans think he's going to be a great coach. We'll see how it works out, since he's not an actual coordinator. But especially in that semifinal game against the Brahmas, his play calling was a huge reason why that game was an absolute blowout. It was only as close as it was because of that fumble the Brahmas had. Overall, it was just a blowout. And the Battlehawks as a whole, they used the A.J. McCarron injury excuse, but even before the injury, they really only had like 2.5 or 3 weeks where they actually looked great. And considering the fact that the team basically said McCarron held the offense back, and they brought back Manny Wilkins, you know what I mean? According to the coaching staff and Beck, McCarron's injury shouldn't have really had an effect on the offense, if you read in between the lines. But the offense finished as one of the 4 worst units in the league in yards per game wise at 272. And when your passing yards are less than the defenders, when you consider the receiving core difference that both teams had, you kind of see what I'm saying when there is some sort of a problem here. So it does make sense that, this is actually kind of a good move in disguise for the Battlehawks. We'll see who they replace him with. It'll be very interesting, but we'll see. Now, the San Antonio Brahmas, one of the most boring teams to talk about in this video because they did absolutely nothing. They have the exact same staff. They are one of just 2 teams to bring back the staff. That's it. They run it back. And why shouldn't they? Look, the biggest issues for this team was that they got a couple injuries in that Week 10 game, missing their running backs, quarterbacks playing hurt. They lost it, had to go play in St. Louis, got the job done when they were healthy. And yes, they did get beat bad by the Stallions. I get it was a close game in the first half. It was still a shutout. But there's really not much to complain about this team. This team had a lot of areas we thought might not be incredible, like receiver. Receivers ended up being really good. Quarterback was the only one where they kind of were disappointing, right? The Quentin Dormade believers got proven wrong when he came in, had one good half, and that was it. Chase Garbers went from looking like an MVP candidate to being hurt and then doing whatever that championship game performance was. So just getting a new quarterback, which is what they've done with Kellen Mond, bringing back Kevin Hogan, potentially giving him more snaps, makes sense. There's really not much the Brahmas needed to do. They shouldn't have really done anything, so I actually like this. I think this is a good decision by Stoops and everybody, or by Phillips and everybody, my apologies. So, it's a great move. Now, the Stallions. The Stallions are one of the teams, just like the Defenders, that it's, kind of a secondary. According to State Stallions and all that, the team is pretty much bringing back a very similar staff, with really the big change being Anthony Blevins is not returning. He was hired during the season. He's not back. And that Bill Johnson, who was just hired a week ago to the Bears, is out at defensive line. So those are the 2 real big changes for the team. Now, the defensive line one could be a big deal. Bill Johnson was a very good coach in that realm. How? Well, again, the top 3 sacks, as I was telling you about earlier, the big 3 teams of the Brahmas, Panthers, and Stallions had 29 to 32 sacks. They absolutely crushed every other team in the league. The Renegades came in at 22, and then no one else had 20. So these 3 teams were just the best at pass rushing. 181 yards lost from sacks is insane. And again, the Stallions were the only team in the league to have not one but 2 players in the top 5 in sacks, with Carlos Davis and Taco Charlton. So this wasn't even like DC, who DC had a couple great sackers like Malik Fisher, who pretty much did all the heavy lifting for him, or the Battlehawks with Travis Feeney. This was a team that had many guys that could get you a lot of sacks. Again, the 2 of them only combined for 13 sacks. They still had another 16 between the rest of their team. So losing Johnson could hurt. Again, bring back the rest of the staff, not a shock at all. Again, they just won the championship. It's just a matter of trying to replace Johnson. Do they try and get Blevins back, or is he just gone? What do they do at the defensive line? That's pretty much the only thing with the team. Again, there's not much to say about the Stallions. Overall, Really, again, they were a championship team. They've been the best team in the league since 2022. So, is what it is. Now, the Houston Roughnecks. This is the one that everybody laughed at. So, the Roughnecks essentially brought back the same team. Technically, there's more differences than James Larson says. Bob Connolly isn't at the offensive line coach anymore. They don't have one, at least officially yet, which I think a lot of people say is overall a good thing. The offensive line really wasn't insane, so they gave up a ton of sacks. They ended up giving up 26 sacks, which were nowhere near the Showboats level of terrible, but were among the 3 worst teams in the league. So, makes sense that you don't want to bring him back. And they added Tom Cable to be the run game coordinator. So, that's kind of where the big difference is there, right? The run game, when Mark Thompson came back from the injury, it took a lot longer, and they never really got going. He had like 1.5 good games. They ended up finishing as one of the worst teams in the league rushing-wise. Again, nowhere near as bad as the Showboats, but we're still very poor, and we're a distant 7th to the Renegades 6. So a new run game coordinator, not having the same offensive line coach, should help the team out, but it's just very questionable. They bring back everybody else. Again, the Showboats should have been viewed as the worst team in the league last year by a mile. They were easily the worst team. But somehow, someway, the Roughnecks managed to lose not once to them, but twice to them, to where we were forced to say the Roughnecks were the worst team in the league, when again, by all metrics, the Showboats were the worst team. That's how bad the Roughnecks really were last year, was that when they played the team they should have beaten twice, they couldn't even do it. So bring back pretty much the same staff. Yeah, it's pretty much you're just hoping that the GM does everything right, all right? I mean, that's pretty much it. Now, as for the Showboats, of course, have the big thing that this was the real fully overdone return, or different staff, right? Ken Wisenhunt, the new head coach, the only new head coach in the league this year, brought in pretty much a full staff, aside from 2. You have TJ returning at the tight end receiver, and then you have Jim Turner returning at O-line. Now, I know a lot of people might be very questionable about Jim Turner returning as an offensive line coach. There's one caveat. Technically speaking, he was also like a run game or running back coach last year. So he's going to have more time to focus on just the O-line, which hopefully helps it out. Because again, they had 39 sacks taken, which is horrific. That's almost 4 a game. That pretty much is. And again, I could have literally spent like 15 minutes finding every single stat this team sucked at. Safe to say this team, if there's a stat that's negative, they were probably worst in the league at it. Pretty much forced fumbles the only one they really weren't. Now, there's a lot of guys to talk about. Lee Morris, a player that's played for this team, is now a coach. A lot of other guys. The main one, of course, is Ken Wisenhunt, who we talked about before. A former head coach, got a team to a Super Bowl. Big deal. But we've done a full video on him. And Jaron Horton, the defensive coordinator for that 2023 Maulers defense that a lot of people say is one of the best defenses in spring football. This team had been signing a lot of former Maulers players. Of course, they signed like Mark Gilbert recently, if not mistaken, and Boogie Roberts a while ago. And those are just a couple of them. There's a lot of former Maulers they've been signing. And we kind of been theorizing that Jaron Horton was going to get this job, and he did. He is the defensive coordinator for the Showboats. This is a huge deal for the team, obviously. Having somebody like him there, not much to say. They're going to be a really good move for the team. It, in theory, should instantly make this defense go from being an absolute pitiful unit to being, at worst, a competitive and decent unit. But if everything works out, you pretty much are making it to where you can have Ken focus on the offense. It's pretty much been speculated that he is going to be the offensive coordinator, kind of like Skip Holtz does. So he's going to have, his control of the offense. He's going to let Jaron control the defense, so where it's kind of like a double coach team kind of way. And if it works out, they're going to be really good. And the last team is, again, basic, not much to say. Panthers, just like the Brahmas, everybody's back. Again, no real reason to change it. The biggest issues this team had were injuries. Bryce Perkins getting hurt at the end of the regular season, so he couldn't play in the playoff game. Frank Gidna getting hurt mid-season. The quarterbacks consistently getting hurt. It wasn't just Perkins. Of course, you had E.J. Perry getting hurt at points. Injuries are really the only thing that really kind of held this team back. Now, yes, the playoff game was a closer game than the score entails, especially at halftime. It was a very close game, but the Panthers didn't get the job done, but they finished 7-3. Everybody pretty much agrees they were the second best team in the league last year when it was all said and done. So again, just like the Brahmas, really was no need to change anything up. It's just kind of hoping that, Perkins develops from what we saw him do last year. In the limited time he played, he looked incredible. If he can even be like 80% of what he showed, he will be an elite quarterback in this league. Hope that works out. Hope that Ginn is back fully healthy. The defense continues to be a great unit. Your receiving core is pretty much always been a good unit, and you brought a lot of your big name players back. Again, no real reason to change a lot. This is a team that already proved last year they can beat Birmingham. They just, can't turn the ball over drive after drive like they did in the third quarter. If that happens, they can get it done. No real reason to change everything. Solid. So that'll do it. This has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. We're getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers. We're doing a giveaway, less than 20 away. Again, you got to have Instagram or Twitter to claim the prize if you win due to trying to, DM to get it out. And with these coaching staffs coming out, that does mean that, yes, next week, I don't know what day, but next week, I will have my yearly coach ranking video, head coach rankings. One of the most anticipated videos in the channel is that pretty much signifies that, hey, the season is right around the corner or is there. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, guys, have a great night.